So I think this was the first time that we were like, sounds maybe like Jeff's shading David a little bit, and in a way that is very deserved. Hey there. As you can tell, I'm back again for another conversation around David Dobrik, the Vlog Squad, and this whole mess that we're all privy to right now. And I know conversations around this topic can dredge up feelings related to our own past experiences, so I totally respect and appreciate everybody's decision to either consume or not consume this content. But if you have made the decision to stay open to having these conversations, then I appreciate that too, because while this ongoing conversation can seem nauseating at times, I think most of us can agree that this is more than just drama. And as we're going into April, which is SA Awareness and Prevention Month, I do think that we need to make sure that we've had a full and comprehensive conversation around what constitutes SA, as well as our collective responsibility when we are witness to or privy to the signs that an SA may be about to occur or occurring. And the long and short of my message is that the members of the Vlog Squad are at varying rates realizing the consequences of staying complicit or playing a role in these situations. And they're having to learn. Whether or not they will, that's up to each individual, but they're having to. And there's still something missing. There's something missing from their side of the conversation, even when the members that do come forward give their statements and seem very remorseful and empathetic and supportive of the victims. There's still something missing. And I want to talk about that, but I also want to really just kind of address specifically Jeff Wittek, because last week I did talk about his first video he put out around this, and then kind of talked a little bit about his experience on frenemies, and that situation did not make him look good. And then of course since then Jeff has put out another video, so I do want to give an update on how I've received that information that he's given us. So just like David Dobrik has received criticism for seeming so remorseful, showing us his tears and vulnerability only after losing all of his sponsorships, in a small way, the very same thing is happening with Jeff Wittek. And so if we agree that David Dobrik can't really truly be seen as sorry if that's the only reason that he's apologizing, the same kind of has to be said about Jeff Wittek too, though I do think that there are a few differences in those two men's situations. Of course, Jeff Wittek has lost some really important brand partnerships, and of course that's what sparked a lot of this emotion that we've seen from him, a lot of retaliation and now a lot of apology. However, between that first video and that second video, Jeff underwent a lot of scrutiny, and he has been in front of cameras. He has gone on the Frenemies podcast, where the hosts Ethan and Trisha, particularly Ethan, did not go easy on him. They challenged him in many ways. They asked him some very difficult questions, and in my opinion, educated him in many ways, and or pointed him in the direction of the education he's so needed. And this is not to say that I think that he has absorbed all the education he needs, but I do think that he's taken in some of it. So to kind of recap Jeff's most recent video, kind of I was gonna say the amendment to his apology, but the first one wasn't an apology. Admittedly so, it wasn't even branded as an apology. I don't think it was trying to masquerade as an apology, whereas say David Dobrik was masquerading as somebody giving an apology in that first video, and then he lost his sponsorships and then made a second video that looked more like an apology. Jeff put out a pretty angry video after he'd lost his sponsorships, then had these conversations, and then got back in front of the camera to talk about some things that maybe he got wrong. And so that's what I want to acknowledge, but I also still want to talk about, of course, like I said, what's missing here. So in the beginning of Jeff's video, he talks a good bit about how selfish he was in his first video and really up until the moment that he released this newer video. He gave a lot of credit to Hannah and SA survivors in general. He apologized for his selfish acts, his defensiveness that was sheerly selfish.
I respect her for coming forward and telling it. It takes a lot. And to have somebody like me come on and just focus on myself and my part of the story and saying that it was a lie just because I was selfish and I didn't want to be mentioned in this act at all. Imagine if something like being assaulted and then nothing happens to that person, but they keep growing and keep getting more successful and keep making the same jokes. I had to take some time to think about all this.
What I appreciated most probably was that he recognized that by discrediting any part of the Insider article that sparked all of this, he was discrediting the victim.
I said I didn't want to discredit the victim, but by discrediting the reporter and my small, minuscule part in the story, I did just that. I discredited the entire story that this girl worked up the courage to tell, and I feel horrible about it, and I just want to apologize.
And this is something that I said in my last video, and it was refreshing to hear Jeff say that he was discrediting the victim by discrediting the article. So whether or not this apology is genuine, that much was appreciated by me. Though my opinion only matters so much, and we'll get to that later on after I've recapped this video. A couple minutes into the video, Jeff mentions that there was a text, and I'll read that in a little bit. He says that there was a text that was sent to David 3 months after this essay happened, and that Jeff was not privy to this text. And I do think that the story around this text message is really important in determining, as we've been talking about, the culpability of each party involved. So I will be talking more about that text and sharing the text with you guys. But in this section, he talks about how he was not made aware of this text and that he suspects perhaps David was trying to kind of cover his squeaky clean image or his squeaky clean brand. And I think that this was the first time, in my opinion, that it sounded like Jeff was being anything less than supportive of David Dobrik. If I were to make a guess, I would say that a lot of the positive response to Jeff's video that there is, not everybody's giving it positive response, and that's understandable, but I think a lot of positive response is due to the fact that Jeff has now started to speak out against David Dobrik a little bit. I think we'd like to see a lot more, but to see anything less than support for David is a pretty big departure to see from anybody who's still in the vlog squad. I think a prime example is Scotty Sire and how he made an ass of himself before this conversation about Hannah started and we were talking about Seth.
First of all, David's a great person. Jason's a great person. In fact, they're both fantastic people. David doesn't have a mean bone in his body. He's so nice. When someone does something that really upsets him, he gets disappointed instead of angry and be like, why'd you do that? That's not cool, dude. And Jason also is like the sweetest, most caring, there for you anytime you need him person in the world. So to see them being attacked like this is just like, it's ridiculous.
We see excommunicated members of the vlog squad and those who've left on their own volition speak out against the vlog squad. But those that are still in the vlog squad don't seem to want to say anything about David directly unless it's positive or, of course, unless they're making some sort of joke. So I think this was the first time that we were like, sounds maybe like Jeff's shading David a little bit and in a way that is very deserved. And so I'm really hopeful that some of these members will, quite frankly, take their heads out of their asses and just tell the truth. And on that note, Jeff talks about how he doesn't have the courage to talk to the public about what happened to his eye, what caused these injuries. He says that it was a stupid reason. He just doesn't have the courage. And the reason he says this is to make a comparison to Hannah coming forward and telling her story about what happened that night. And so he was kind of juxtaposing himself and this accident and how he perceives himself, like we said last week, to be some big tough guy, and yet he doesn't have the courage to speak about what happened. And yet Hannah has come forward to tell her story, and so in general he was commending her and other SA survivors for being able to tell their story if they are able to. He reiterates that he was being selfish. He says that he was acting irrational and emotional after experiencing some brain trauma, which I don't think is something that should be discounted. I think it could sound like an excuse, but I do think that it is something to take into account, that he is arguably the only Vlog Squad member really speaking on this situation while still dealing with these surgeries and this traumatic brain injury. And so he says, of course, you know, that he was emotional, that he was blindly covering for his friends. And while I would like to see him follow that up by telling us more about what happened, even if it does throw somebody else under the bus, he's at least acknowledging that that's what he's done. So we'll start there. And he basically finishes the video by saying that he wants to learn and grow from this situation, and that he has donated to a charity or an organization called RAINN that provides support to SA survivors. So he encourages his audience to either donate to RAINN if they can, or if they are survivors of an SA, to call RAINN to get help, guidance, and counseling. I think that's more or less what they provide. I'll look into that and provide some information in the description. I feel like it couldn't hurt to pass along that message. And he wrapped up his video by thanking his audience for providing him this education. And of course, he's got a ways to go. But while I have said very clearly, and I've heard other people say, this is not my apology to accept. I said that very clearly on Twitter to a person, we'll call her Honey. Not that that girl will ever see this, but we do need to be careful about how we provide support to people when they do put out messages like this. Because on one hand, if somebody is showing signs of growth, signs of remorse, I don't believe that we should discourage them by saying, no, you're no better than you were yesterday, or the day you made that last video, or the day that this essay happened. I don't think it's productive to tell people that they haven't learned, that they haven't grown. Of course, we want to see that growth before we really determine if it happened. So I think it's a good thing to encourage these creators, these influencers, to educate themselves, to grow, to get better. But we need to be careful in terms of how much praise we give them, because at the end of the day, this all came out of misbehavior on their part. So while you can accept an apology, a person shouldn't be overly praised for giving one, if that makes sense. Of course it makes sense, right? Apologies are to be accepted or not. They are not meant to be praised. And I think that that is something that maybe the audience needs to think about a little bit. And then, of course, it is up to every individual person, I suppose, to determine whether or not they have seen change and growth in a creator and whether or not they want to continue to support that creator. But the message still holds that it is not our apology to accept. And that's a very important conversation to have, because there have been times where we've seen influencers being burned at the stake continually, year after year after year, when they've apologized for something and the person who the apology was for accepted the apology and forgave them. I think that the opposite of this point is also true. If somebody has been apologized to and has accepted the apology, then it's not necessarily our place to continue punishing someone for an act that was not done unto us. Again, I want to be like, does that make sense? I hope so.
This is a super quick reminder to like this video and subscribe to my channel if that's something you want to do. If that's not something you want to do, just don't. I'll shut up and start talking now.
So while it's up to every person to determine how much they accept Jeff as a person moving forward, it's still up to Hannah to decide ultimately whether or not she accepts these apologies from David, from Jeff, from Todd, if we want to call that an apology, which we'll get to. And we may never get the answer to that question. Does Hannah accept these apologies? We may never know. But what we can look out for is signs of growth. And at the very least, we can have these conversations so that people, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it, particularly men, particularly people in these boys club situations, really start to learn, like I said at the beginning of the video, what constitutes an SA and what are the signs that you may be witness to an SA happening or an SA about to happen. So in terms of what I did appreciate about Jeff's video, obviously I appreciated him recognizing that his previous actions were very, very selfish. However, whether or not he truly took the criticism to heart that he received, of course, by the audience and by Trisha and Ethan on Frenemies, whether or not he truly intuited that criticism is yet to be known, which we'll see through his actions. As mentioned, I'm gonna sound like a broken record because these things are very important and we need to make them crystal clear. But via his words, he did accept the criticism. He thanked the audience for the criticism. And it sounds like, at least from a words perspective, he has tried to atone for the first video. I appreciate that much. One thing I want to acknowledge, which I briefly mentioned, was that he tells us in this video that he was not aware of the text that Hannah sent Dom 3 months after the essay happened. And I think most of us have kind of briefly seen this text or know that it exists, but I think that a lot of what is, I was saying this in a conversation yesterday and I didn't have this in my notes to say today, but I do think that it's, for me, it was a really kind of enlightening moment. But I think that a lot of the conversations we're having around this situation, it's not really getting anywhere because I don't think we're talking about really where the actual sinister nature of this situation exists, and it exists in certain details. So we've been talking a lot about who was there, who knew that Hannah was drunk, who provided the alcohol to Hannah and her friends, who made a joke of this situation, and all that stuff is so important, but I don't think we're going any deeper than that, and we're not looking at the details that really tell us, again, how sinister some of these details are. And I think that might be why so many of us are kind of like spinning our wheels out. I think a lot of it too has to do with the fact that these guys, like I said, no matter how much remorse they show and support they want to show to the victims, they're not owning up to their role in this situation. But in terms of those texts, so if you didn't know, 3 months after this video was made, Hannah reached out to Dom to essentially retract consent to have the video up, the consent that she gave him the next morning when she was still drunk. So in this text message where she retracts that consent and asks for the video to be taken down, she goes ahead and lays out the entire narrative for what happened. And I think that that is super important to note. So I will read this text message. It is very long. She says, "Hey Dom, if you remember me, my name is blank, and we met through my friend blank when you needed some girls for your video. On the night of November 25th, my friends and I came to your house to shoot. Upon arriving, I hadn't intended to do anything sexual with you or any okay, I respect your wishes, the video's down." Which now other things are popping up for me because I had forgotten that she mentions Trisha specifically and says after Trisha's video, assuming that she's referring to that video February 2nd, 2019, the video that ended Trisha's relationship with the Vlog Squad. It's crazy to me that November, December, January, that this all happened around the same time. Trisha's video and Hannah reaching out to Dom to provide this narrative and to say to please take the video down. The fact that David treated Trisha so poorly after that video, demanding that Jason break up with her, continually discrediting her as just kind of some crazy person who can't be believed, is disgusting to me, because along the same lines of like discrediting the journalist that told Hannah's story is discrediting the victim, to discredit the person who was able to give somebody the strength and the courage to speak to their assailant. Is that correct? Their abuser. Like, he should have shown Trisha a lot more respect, if for no other reason than what she did for Hannah. That's all I'm going to say about that. I mean, that's just a separate conversation to have. But the assumption here is that David saw this text message. I believe there's a chance he didn't. I don't think he's overtly stated whether or not he has. Please correct me in the comments if you have seen otherwise. But Jeff does say that David saw this text message. And that is really disparaging, because David, sure, took down the video, but he did not stop hanging out with Dom. He continued to hang out with Dom until right around when lockdown happened last year. And as these stories were coming out, he continued to discredit any of the sources that might support Hannah until he lost his sponsorships. So that, when I say that the what's sinister is in the details, I'm talking about that. Like the fact that David received that narrative from the victim herself and still continued to act the way he did. And I do think it's an important detail to note that Jeff was not aware of this narrative that she provided. That doesn't mean that he's without fault. That means that David knew more about what happened. Dom definitely knew more about what happened than Jeff did. And so again, that's just another example of where these Vlog Squad members need to come forward and say what they know, what they didn't know, because it really starts to kind of shine a better light on who is responsible for what. And I think we've talked already about some people who think that everybody's equally responsible or only Dom is responsible. And I highly disagree with both of those kind of like polarized opinions. Every single person who witnessed any part of this narrative bears some weight of responsibility. And here I'm talking about where Jeff lies on that spectrum, but particularly in comparison to people like David Dobrik and Todd Smith. You guys heard from my last video about what I think of Todd Smith these days. I think Todd Smith can eat a bag of dicks. What I think Jeff is failing to do in this video, which is what we see with David, with Todd, with anybody who's spoken up about the situation that was actually there, which might just be those three guys. But what he's failing to do is to explicitly state his role in that night. Of course, these guys probably have lawyers telling them what they can and can't say or should and shouldn't say, but I really think that the judgment and criticism towards Jeff would not be nearly as harsh if he would just explicitly state what he did. You know, Jeff, did you know that these girls were drunk? And did you know that there was a chance that Dom could be having sex with one of them? If those boxes are both checked yes, which they should be based on we know, then that is enough information for you to know that an SA is or might be happening. Let's even give you the benefit of the doubt and say that you didn't see anything when you looked into the room. I think I said it in so many words, and then I watched Frenemies and Trisha said it way more succinctly than I could, believe it or not. Trisha Paytas did. Actually, that's not that surprising. I'm not very concise. But Trisha said it this way, and I think that it really just kind of encapsulated what I believe. The problem with a lot of these guys and a lot of guys like them, and plenty of girls too, I'm sure, and people of all genders, but particularly in these like boys club scenarios, a lot of people are comparing it to like the frat house mentality, and I know that that kind of offends people, but I mean, we've seen this shit on Animal House and the Brett Kavanaugh situation and just time and time over the course of history. It seems that so many of these guys are mistaken in that they only believe an SA happened if it was violent, Without getting too deep into my history in a situation that is not about me, it has happened to me that I have been SA'd without having somebody be violent to me, and I've had my story discredited by somebody extremely important to me because I wasn't held down and the person didn't force himself on me. However, that person did use alcohol in lieu of consent. And that is the problem. The problem is how we are defining SA. That's what needs to change. That's why we're continuing to have these conversations, video after video after video. So I want to know, how much did Jeff know? And I don't believe him if he says he doesn't know that there was any alcohol present or that anybody was drinking. I think he has admitted to that people were drinking. But, just be honest. Did you buy the alcohol? No? Did you go with the person who bought the alcohol? Was it Toddy? Just be honest. That's my criticism, is that he still hasn't come forward to say exactly his role and what he knows. And I really think, in speaking about technicalities, I do think that Toddy bought a bottle of Jack Daniels for the party. And I believe that Jeff was with him. And I believe that Jeff is avoiding throwing his friend under the bus. I think he's covering for Todd, and it's continuing to make him look worse. That is why I have such ire towards Todd Smith, who can go eat a bag of dicks. So, Todd Smith's apology. Better believe I have that too, and better believe it is a notepad apology. Todd's apology reads, and I believe this was posted to Twitter: "This is an apology to Hannah and her friends, an acknowledgement of my role in the trauma they went through that night and the pain they've carried every day since. I would like to own up to my mistakes and apologize to those I have hurt with my insensitivity. I do not condone sexual misconduct of any kind. I am sorry for the disgusting comment I made in that video and any other videos. I'm sorry to have been a part of the toxic environment that got you into that situation. I'm sorry that I was so naive and did not challenge my own perception to know what was actually happening in that room. Although I never left the apartment until it was time to go and never purchased alcohol for anybody that night, I did hop up to make a joke for the vlog. I was trying to say something edgy and crude for a laugh, but it was not funny and I'm ashamed of myself. I am in full support of Hannah coming forward. I cannot imagine the way she feels, and I am so sorry to have been involved. And I understand that my inaction was of equally awful consequence. I was in the apartment and contributed to the toxic environment that led to an SA. I know I need to continue to educate myself. I sincerely apologize to those I have hurt, including SA survivors. Now I see how my actions added to a culture that allowed this to happen, and I am embarrassed that this is what it took for me to learn the effects of my behavior, inaction, and ignorance. I fully plan on learning from my mistakes and educating myself through different resources on SA." Which would be great if Toddy's role was inaction, if Toddy were just complicit. That's the issue I take. And maybe somewhere, somehow, Toddy is telling the truth, Jeff is telling the truth, and in some weird universe, I will stand corrected if that stuff is not true. But Hannah told us that she saw the guys walk back in. Hannah told us that Todd was carrying a bottle of Jack Daniels. So if that is true, then no, Toddy, you are not just inactive. If she's lying about that detail, then honestly, just say it. At this point, that's what's so maddening to me, is that we keep saying like, oh, I don't want to discredit the victim. I don't want to discredit the victim. But you're failing to acknowledge the role that she said you played in all this. That's my issue with Todd Smith. Well, apparently I have a lot of issues with Todd Smith, but they're all related, right, to this. So the message about being complicit and being in that environment and creating and contributing to that environment, all of that is great. It's great that Todd Smith wants to learn from this situation and keep that in mind and not be a part of that kind of environment again. Great. But you shouldn't be apologizing for your inaction, because you did actually take part. And it's not that I think, let me back up here. Jeff's girlfriend, Natalie. I'm not going to get into any allegations against Natalie and roles she's played in other situations. It irks me because these influencers say things like, I'm taking time to reflect. I needed to take some time to think about this and reflect on and educate myself. Meanwhile, Trisha Paytas is telling us that Natalie and Jeff were hanging out with Olivia Jade and her boyfriend that very weekend and just like partying it up, which I'm not going to be too judgmental about like what people do during this time that they're meant to reflect. Like perhaps like you can do that and still have a good time with your friends. But from an optics perspective, to be posting Instagram stories and stuff like that while you are supposed to be reflecting, and meanwhile your best friend is going in front of cameras, whether that be his own or on some podcast, and continually covering for you while you're just partying it up, saying that you're reflecting, like that drives me nuts. And so even though Natalie was not present for this situation, the fact that she is standing by her boyfriend and they're both saying they're reflecting and they're partying, it irritates me. And so in having these conversations about Todd's culpability versus Jeff's culpability, especially when it comes to who bought the alcohol, in talking to my friends about that, I've heard some people say things like, it doesn't matter, whether it was Todd who bought the alcohol or Jeff who bought the alcohol, that's a technicality. They both went out. They both went out to buy the alcohol, and so they're both just as scummy. And I agree with that, but something still isn't like sitting well with me. There's still something that cognitively is causing me some sort of dissonance, or I'm just like not at a state of equilibrium with it all. And I think the reason is because there are two conversations to be had about this. There is a moral conversation that really kind of assesses how responsible somebody is from a moral standpoint, even if they are absolved of criminal responsibility. And so in that situation, then if the two guys went out to go get alcohol and Todd was the one who took the orders and Todd was the one who used his credit card and Todd was the one who had the bottle in his hand when he came back, then they're pretty much equally responsible for that. But then there is the question of, how are these people behaving in the face of these technicalities when the conversation is about criminal responsibility and culpability? And I think that's where like my brain was like not sitting easy with just being like, yeah, but they're both equally responsible. I think in one conversation they are, and then if you're talking about criminal responsibility, they're not necessarily. I mean, it is on the person who bought the alcohol with their credit card, their cash, their tender. And I believe that was Todd Smith. And so the anger that I have towards Todd is just compounded by the fact that I think that he's being a shitty friend, that Jeff is kind of under a lot of scrutiny, and there are conversations around the moral responsibility he had in this situation, as well as the criminal responsibility he has in this situation, and he is taking the fall for both of those guys, when I do believe that Todd is the one who is more criminally responsible. That is why Toddy Smith can go eat a bag of dicks. He's a shit friend. He's a shit friend, and so I think that, and I said this in my last video, but that is why I think that Jeff should continue to out the vlog squad as much as he needs to. And I said this also in my last video. It can start with a conversation with Toddy Smith. He can go to Todd and be like, hey, I'm taking the fall for something that we both did, but you really did, and I need you to say something. Say something, because however much of a shitbag as you see Jeff Wittek, it's just not fair for him to be the only one to speak on behalf of at least him and Todd, and kind of like them as a group in the role that they played in this. And when it comes down to that, the moral question of just the alcohol buying aspect of this whole story, we probably need more information as to exactly what these guys were told. We heard quotes like, go buy alcohol to loosen them up, but we also heard that it was originally Jason who was told to go buy the alcohol, so we don't know exactly what was said to Jeff and or Todd before they left for the liquor store. And I think if we're being realistic with ourselves, if they thought that they were just going out to buy liquor to provide to a party, and yes, they knew that some of the people at the party were 20, it's like, yeah, it's illegal, you can get in trouble, again, criminally, like bad. But we've all been there. I've been 20 years old at a party where my 21-year-old friends bought the alcohol, and I'm not over here talking about how they're such shitbag people for doing that. I do think that they need to own up to their responsibility and reap whatever consequences come their way for that. But I think that we are missing information that we need in order to determine how culpable they were just in the alcohol buying portion of this story. Did they just think that they were buying alcohol for a party that was, for people mostly between the ages of like 20 and 25? Or did they believe that they were buying alcohol to lower the inhibitions of the girls there so that group sex could happen and David would get a vlog out of it? We don't know. And we don't know, especially because, again, these guys are not stepping up to the plate and telling us exactly what happened. And so from here, really what's on my mind is kind of, for one, again, how much can these guys learn, or how sorry can they be, and how much could they have learned from this situation in such a short time and only after they've lost their sponsors? We shouldn't forget about that. And that's something we should keep our eye on. People can learn and they can grow, but I do think it's going to take more time than this to see that happen. And I am very disturbed at the notion that David probably saw that text from Hannah and still continued to behave the way he did, still continued to spend time with Dom, still continued to discredit Trisha until he lost his sponsors. So if we're ranking scumbags, I still think that Dom is at the top, David is very close to the top, and then you have Todd, and then you have Jeff. They all played roles, but I do think at this point we really need to look harder at the other guys. I think Jeff has said what he needs to, and now it's just his time to go and prove to us that what he says he's learned, he's actually learned, or what he says he's learning, he's continuing to actually learn. And I do believe that it's possible that he was sincere and that he will continue to do so. So with that, like I said, check out the description. I'm going to put information in the description of this video to the charity or organization that Jeff mentioned, because I do want to support growth to those who are sincere about seeking it. So check that out. This video is already too long for me to even think about rambling at the end. So to you, the one person who's watching who's not me, thank you so much for coming back to another long video, watching to this point, having this conversation with me, liking the video if you did that, commenting if you did that. As you guys know, engagement is helpful for me and my channel. To those of you who are clicking the subscribe button or have clicked the subscribe button during this video, thank you so much. To you guys, and I'm addressing multiple people when I just said to you, the one person. You know what I mean. You are one person. And to you, I love you, dude. Check out the description. I'll see you guys. You guys will see me in the next video. And I love you. Thanks. Bye.